Hello, Fur Grow Falcons. It's Mrs. Jarrett, and I'm back with a new book that we should have just enough time to read before summer starts. So it is called Undead Pets, Night of the Howling Hound. It's kind of a fun story written by Sam Hay, illustrated by Simon Cooper, and published by Grosset Dunlap. The story so far. 10-year-old Joe Edmonds is desperate for a pet, but his mom's allergies mean he's got no chance. Then Charlie, his great uncle, gives him an ancient Egyptian amulet that he claims will grant Joe a single wish. But instead of getting a pet, Joe becomes the protector of undead pets. He is bound by the amulet to solve the problems of zombie pets so they can pass peacefully to the afterlife. And so the trouble begins. Here's the illustrations on that first page. Chapter 1. Thwack! Joe gave the tent peg a thump with a mallet, then tugged the rope to make sure it was secure. Awesome, said Matt, pegging in the other side. Looks like we're the first to finish. They were at the Wolf's Leap Activity Center on the edge of Brockton Forest for a school camping trip. Not even a tornado would shift this thing, said Ben, poking his head out of the tent. But just then a tornado did shift it. A tornado in the shape of Bradley Piker, or Spiker, as he was known. He raced over and hurled himself at the side of the tent, making it bulge inward. Hey! Yelled Joe. Watch it! Says who? This is my tent too, said Spiker. I'm with you guys tonight. What? Joe groaned. He really didn't want to share a tent with Spiker. He was the biggest troublemaker in the class. Yep, Mr. Hill says I'm with you. I hope you're not going to wet your pants and call for your mommy when it gets dark tonight, Joe Edmonds. Joe shot him a dirty look. Especially if the wolf starts howling, Spiker said with a smirk. The ghost wolf of Brockton Forest. Yeah, said Joe. I know. Hundreds of years ago, a wolf escaped from some hunters by leaping off of some rocks. As he spoke, he glanced over Spiker's shoulder and noticed a jagged rock face just above the tree line. But don't forget the best part. After it escaped, said Spiker in his spooky voice, the wolf came back and stalked the hunters, catching them one by one, ripping out their throats and crunching their bones. Matt grinned. You made that bit up. And people say, added Spiker, his voice dropping to a ghoulish whisper, that you can still hear the ghost of the wolf howling in the woods at night. There they are talking. As he spoke, the wind picked up and a cloud drifted over the afternoon sun, darkening the sky. Joe shivered. After all the weird stuff he'd seen thanks to Uncle Charlie's Egyptian amulet, he could easily imagine a ghost wolf lurking in the forest, watching and waiting. Hey, you guys, came a shout. If you've finished setting up your tent, I need some volunteers to help collect firewood. It was Lizzie, one of the camp counselors. She was small and wiry with short red hair. According to their teacher, Miss Bruce, she was a champion rock climber. Come on, it'll be dark before we get the fire going. By the time they had built the fire, the counselors had prepared a campfire dinner. Starving, said Joe, sitting down next to Matt with a plate piled high with franks and beans. There were 20 children from Joe's class here, along with Miss Bruce and the principal, Mr. Hill. They sat together on logs arranged in a circle around the fire, digging into their dinner. As Joe shoveled in his last spoonful of beans, he heard a strange noise in the distance. Oh! What was that? Matt took a bite of hot dog and shrugged. I didn't hear anything. Oh! Listen! There it is again! Joe peered out, but it was getting dark and he couldn't see anything. It's coming from over there. Matt stopped eating for a second and listened. Then he smiled impishly. You're hearing things, Joe. Maybe all the talk of ghosts is freaking you out. But before Joe could reply, Mr. Hill blew a whistle to get the class's attention. When everyone's finished eating, I want you all to help clean up. You kids over there," he said, pointing to Joe, Matt, and a few others, "collect the plates. And that group over there, you'll be on dishes tonight." There were groans from the dishwashing group, but Mr. Hill went on. "You're going to be swapping jobs tomorrow night. Remember, camping is all about teamwork, and everyone has to help. I remember when my wife and I went camping with friends in the Appalachian Mountains. Everyone pitched in, especially when the blizzard started." Joe and Matt grinned at each other and rolled their eyes. Mr. Hill had already spent the entire bus ride boring the class silly with stories about his camping adventures, and now he was starting another one. They quickly stacked the dirty dishes and carried them to the sinks. "Want to hear a ghost story?" Ben said, turning on his flashlight and putting it under his chin so that his face lit up like a ghoul. It was a dark, stormy night, and a group of kids were camping in a creepy forest. "Oh, hey!" Joe interrupted. "Did you hear that?" "Not again," Matt snorted. "What is it this time, Joe? Another ghosty?" "No, it sounds like an animal howling." "A ghost wolf?" said Matt. Yeah, very funny, Joe." "Let's go take a look," said Joe. "Come on." "What, now?" Ben glanced at the trees. "In the dark?" Joe nodded. "Why not?" "I'm in," Matt grinned. "What about you, Ben?" "Definitely." Joe pulled his flashlight out of his pocket. "Head for the tents," he whispered. "Everyone will think we've gone to get something. Then we can double back to the trees." As they walked into the forest, the darkness closed in. There was a distant rumble of thunder. "This way," whispered Joe, heading for the path he'd spotted earlier. He flashed his flashlight left and right, the beam catching movements in the bushes. "Did you see that rat?" "Yeah, it was massive," breathed Matt. As they went deeper into the woods, the trees grew denser and the undergrowth thicker. There was no light from the moon now. Joe's heart beat faster. This was how Uncle Charlie must feel when he set off on an expedition. There was another rumble of thunder, closer this time, and Joe heard the howling again, followed by the sound of twigs breaking and bushes being pushed aside. Something crashed through the underbrush. "I think it's over there," Joe hissed, flashing his beam at the bushes. "Spread out!" Matt moved off to the left. Ben headed right, their flashlight beams bouncing around the trees. After a few minutes, Matt called back, "Do you see anything?" "No!" Ben shouted. Their voices were much farther away than Joe expected. He was just about to call them when there was a sudden crack of lightning, and he saw a shape lunging toward him, its sharp teeth flashing white. It crashed into him, sending him flying. He gasped, waiting for the wolf to lock him in its jaws and sink its fangs into him. Chapter 2. Joe felt a scratchy tongue lick his face. He opened his eyes. It was a big, hairy dog. "Hello, Joe," growled the dog. "I need your help." Joe gasped. The creature wasn't a ghost wolf, but it wasn't much better either. Not another undead pet, Joe thought. They wouldn't leave him alone. Joe wriggled free, wiping sticky drool off his face with his sleeve. He shined his flashlight in the animal's face. It wasn't a pretty sight. Green drool hung from its chops, and its red eyes bulged out like ping-pong balls. "Look, I'd really like to help you. Really, I would." Joe shuffled uncomfortably. "But I'm on a school trip. I'm off duty as protector of undead pets, okay?" But it wasn't okay. The dog gave a deep, throaty growl, then its tail drooped. Its eyes boggled, and it started howling again. "Stop it," Joe whispered. He was pretty sure no one else could hear the dog, but the noise was horrendous. "Oh!" As the dog howled, its fur stood up on end. "Look," said Joe, "I can't help you. Head back into the woods and stop making that noise." The dog did stop howling, but it wasn't listening to Joe anymore. It was staring at something over his shoulder. Then its ears picked up and its tail began to wag. And "Squirrel!" it suddenly yelped, and it took off like a bullet. For a few seconds, Joe just stood there wondering if the dog would come back. It didn't. Joe! Joe! Matt suddenly appeared by his side. Are you okay? I thought I heard you shout. Yeah, said Ben, arriving a few seconds later. You sounded like you were talking to someone. I just tripped over a tree root, mumbled Joe. Matt grinned. And what about the noise you heard? Did you see anything? Nope. Then Joe felt a few drops of rain on his head. Maybe we should head back to camp. It's starting to rain. As they retraced their steps, they saw two shadowy figures waiting for them. An enormous flashlight shone in their faces, making them blink. It was Mr. Hill and Lizzie. Where have you been? Demanded Mr. Hill. Joe took a deep breath. We heard a noise and thought we'd take a look. Lizzie smiled kindly. Well, you're not the first and you won't be the last, but it's camp rules. You're not allowed to head off on your own, okay? They nodded, studying their shoes intently. Okay then, said Mr. Hill sternly. Back to camp. And don't let me catch you wandering off by yourselves again, or you'll be on the first bus home. When they got back to their tent, Spiker was smirking. Joe's eyes narrowed. Did you tell Mr. Hill that we'd gone to the woods? Matt nudged him. Better drop it, Joe. We don't want to get in more trouble tonight. Joe scowled and rummaged around for his toothbrush. They all got ready for bed in silence. When Joe opened his eyes the next morning, the sun was shining. He wriggled out of his sleeping bag and pulled on his jeans. Just then a bell rang. Breakfast in 10 minutes, Miss Bruce called. Mr. Hill's frying it up now. Spiker groaned. Ben buried his head in his sleeping bag. Matt looked groggy. Joe grabbed his toothbrush and headed for the bathrooms. But as he passed Mr. Hill's tent, he heard a strange chomping noise. Joe froze. No, no, he groaned. Please don't let it be that dog. Joe glanced across the camp. He could see Mr. Hill busy cooking breakfast on the grill. He looked around to check no one was watching and stepped inside the principal's tent. He gasped. It was chaos. Clothes were strewn across the floor, and right in the middle was the zombie dog, chomping through a package of cookies. What are you doing in here? Joe said, grabbing the cookies out of his mouth. Brian won't mind, said the dog. Brian? Brian who? Joe felt a lurch in his belly. You don't mean Brian Hill, my principal? A stringy piece of green drool dribbled in from the dog's mouth to the floor. Yeah, it growled. My name's Dexter. I was Brian's dog. Could this crazy animal really once have been his principal's dog? Joe Edmonds, what is the meaning of this? Joe spun around. Mr. Hill stood in the doorway, his face pulsating with rage. Dexter started barking with excitement at the sight of his owner, but Mr. Hill couldn't see or hear him at all. The principal snatched the cookies from Joe's hands. How dare you go into someone else's tent and touch their things? What on earth are you doing in here? A few weeks ago, Joe had taken the blame when a zombie hamster had devoured Mr. Hill's lunch, and now it looked like he'd have to do the same again. Joe stammered, desperately trying to think of an excuse. Mr. Hill shook his head. I'm not interested in hearing any of your feeble excuses. As punishment, you can wash the breakfast dishes. Now help me clean up this mess. And that's the end of chapter 2. Until the next time, boys and girls, I hope that you will enjoy some more of the story.